The silence in the Galactic Council chamber was deafening. Ambassador Zector of the Vorthak Empire shifted his massive bulk in the specially reinforced chair, his 6 eyes scanning the holographic display that showed the latest intelligence reports. Around the circular chamber, representatives from 47 different species maintained their own uneasy quiet, each lost in their own thoughts about the disturbing news. "The readings cannot be accurate," whispered Ambassador Lyra of the Celestial Federation, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's ambient light into prismatic rainbows. "The Sol system has been dormant for 3,000 years. Our monitoring stations would have detected any significant activity." High Chancellor Vexon, the ancient leader of the Council, raised one of his 4 arms for attention. His species, the Kethmari, had been spacefaring for over 10 millennia, longer than any other race in the known galaxy. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of eons. "The monitoring stations are precisely what concerns us," Vexon said, his tone grave. 7 of them have gone dark in the past standard month. All were positioned along the outer edge of what the old records call the Terran Quarantine Zone. The mention of Terra sent ripples of unease through the assembled delegates. Even the youngest species in the galaxy knew the stories, though most considered them myths. Tales of a world populated by creatures so violent, so unpredictable, that the combined might of the galaxy had been forced to contain them behind an impenetrable barrier of space stations and automated defense platforms. Admiral Crost of the Hegemon fleet leaned forward, his mechanical augmentations whirring softly. Perhaps the humans finally destroyed themselves. The psychological profiles from 3 millennia ago suggested they were incapable of long-term peaceful coexistence. "Then why are the monitoring stations being systematically disabled?" countered Dr. Yelana, the chief xenobiologist of the Council. "Dead species don't conduct strategic operations against surveillance networks." The holographic display shifted, showing the Sol system in 3-dimensional detail. 8 planets orbited a yellow star, with the 3rd planet highlighted in ominous red. Surrounding the entire system was a sphere of monitoring stations, defense platforms, and automated warning beacons that had maintained their silent vigil for 3,000 years. "The pattern is clear," continued Dr. Yelana, manipulating the display with graceful tentacles. "The disabled stations follow a specific sequence, creating gaps in our surveillance network. Someone is planning something." Ambassador Thren of the Trade Consortium, a nervous creature that resembled an oversized insect, clicked his mandibles anxiously. "The economic implications are staggering. If the humans have somehow survived and are preparing to emerge, every trade route in this sector could be disrupted. The ancient records speak of their tendency toward aggressive expansion." "Aggressive is an understatement," muttered General Korzeth of the Military Alliance. "The historical files describe beings who waged war against their own kind with weapons capable of sterilizing entire continents. They fought conflicts that lasted years, sometimes decades, over resources and ideologies. When we first made contact with them, they had already mastered the art of planetary destruction." The chamber fell silent again as each delegate contemplated the implications. The humans had been quarantined not out of malice, but out of necessity. 3,000 years ago, when they had first achieved faster-than-light travel, their aggressive nature and unpredictable behavior had threatened the stability of the entire galaxy. The Council had made the difficult decision to contain them, hoping that isolation would either eliminate them or force them to evolve beyond their violent tendencies. "There's something else," Vexon said, activating another section of the holographic display. "Our deep space sensors have detected unusual energy signatures emerging from the Sol system. The readings are unlike anything in our databases." The display showed wave patterns that pulsed with strange rhythms, energy frequencies that seemed to follow no known physics. Several delegates gasped as they recognized the implications. "Those energy signatures," breathed Ambassador Zector, his massive frame trembling slightly. "They're not just unknown. They're impossible according to our understanding of galactic physics. How could an isolated species develop technology that surpasses our combined knowledge?" Dr. Yelana's analysis appeared on the display, showing comparative data from thousands of known civilizations. The human energy signatures stood out like beacons, representing technological advancement that should have taken millions of years to achieve. "Consider this," Dr. Yelana said, her voice filled with scientific fascination and growing dread. We isolated them to prevent their aggression from spreading, but we may have inadvertently created something far worse. 3,000 years of forced isolation with no external conflicts to channel their violent nature. What if they turned that aggression inward, using it to drive technological advancement? The implications were staggering. While the galaxy had enjoyed relative peace and stability, focusing on trade, diplomacy, and gradual technological progress, the humans had been locked away with nothing but time and their own ingenuity. They had no external enemies to fight, no territories to conquer through conventional means. Instead, they had been forced to conquer the fundamental forces of the universe itself. "We should have monitored them more closely," Admiral Crost said, his mechanical parts clicking nervously. "The monitoring stations were designed to keep them in, not to study their development." "Our ancestors believed they would destroy themselves within centuries," Vexon replied. "The psychological profiles suggested they were too violent, too chaotic to maintain a stable civilization without external enemies to unite against." "What if that's exactly what they did?" interrupted Ambassador Lyra, her crystalline form pulsing with agitated light. "What if they united against the one enemy they all shared, us?" The thought sent a chill through the chamber. The humans hadn't fought each other into extinction. They had done something far more terrifying. They had learned to work together. 3,000 years of common cause against the species that had caged them like dangerous animals. General Korzeth stood, his armored form imposing even among the diverse assembly. "I recommend immediate military preparation. If the humans are planning to breach the quarantine, we need every fleet in the galaxy ready to respond." "With what?" scoffed Admiral Crost. "Our weapons technology has advanced incrementally over 3 millennia. If these energy readings are accurate, the humans may have achieved breakthrough technologies that render our entire military doctrine obsolete." The debate that followed was heated but ultimately pointless. No one could deny the evidence presented by their sensors. Something was stirring in the Sol system, something that challenged everything they thought they knew about technological development and galactic power structures. As the session stretched into the night cycle, reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy. More monitoring stations had gone dark. Long-range sensors detected massive construction projects on the outer edge of the Sol system. Most disturbing of all, some of the disabled monitoring stations had sent brief transmission bursts before going offline, transmissions in languages that hadn't been heard in the galaxy for 3,000 years. The humans were not only alive but thriving, and they were coming. "There's one more thing," Vexon said as the session drew to a close. "Our historians have been reviewing the old records, trying to understand what we might be facing. They discovered something troubling in the original quarantine protocols." The High Chancellor manipulated the display, showing ancient documents written in the formal script of the old council. The text detailed the original decision to quarantine humanity, including psychological evaluations and behavioral predictions. "The humans were quarantined not just because they were violent," Vexon continued. "They were quarantined because they were adaptive. Every time we thought we understood their capabilities, they exceeded our expectations. Every time we believed we had contained their potential, they found new ways to surprise us." Ambassador Thren's mandibles clicked nervously. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that 3,000 years of isolation may have been the worst possible punishment we could have inflicted. Not on them, but on ourselves. We've given them millennia to adapt, to evolve, to become something beyond our comprehension." The chamber fell into a final, ominous silence. Outside the great windows, the stars seemed dimmer somehow, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath. In the direction of the Sol system, barely visible even with the most advanced telescopes, something ancient and terrible was stirring from its long slumber. The humans were coming, and the galaxy was about to remember why it had been afraid. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the starship Endeavour, watching as the final pieces of humanity's greatest achievement fell into place. 3 kilometers long and bristling with technologies that would have been considered impossible just decades ago. The massive vessel represented the culmination of 3,000 years of human ingenuity, desperation, and carefully channeled rage. "Final systems check complete, Captain," reported Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb from the bridge. His voice carried through the ship's neural interface. a communication system that had evolved from humanity's need to coordinate complex operations without detection by the monitoring stations that had surrounded their home system for millennia. Sarah nodded, her enhanced vision automatically focusing on the construction yards that filled the outer reaches of the Sol system. Hundreds of ships like the Endeavour were nearing completion, each one representing capabilities that no other species in the galaxy could imagine. The isolation that had been meant to contain humanity had instead forged them into something entirely new. "Begin final phase protocols," she commanded, her words transmitted instantly to every ship, station, and facility in the system. The response was immediate and coordinated with a precision that spoke to humanity's evolution during their long imprisonment. 3,000 years ago, humans had been fractious, competitive, and violent. Wars had raged across Earth's surface as different nations and ideologies struggled for dominance. The galaxy had seen this chaos and deemed humanity too dangerous for contact with other civilizations. But isolation had done something unexpected. It had given humanity a common enemy and unlimited time to perfect themselves. Dr. James Harrison materialized on the observation deck through the ship's advanced transport system. As humanity's chief xenobiologist and one of the architects of what they called the Emergence Protocol, he had spent his entire career studying the species that had caged them like dangerous animals. "The psychological profiles are complete," he reported, his expression grim. 3,000 years of monitoring their transmissions, studying their behavior patterns, analyzing their technological development. We know them better than they know themselves. Sarah turned from the viewport, her enhanced neural implants already processing the vast amounts of data that Harrison had compiled. Like all humans of her generation, she had been born into a world where the genetic modifications, cybernetic enhancements, and neural augmentations that had been developed over the centuries were simply part of normal human evolution. "Tell me about their greatest weakness," she said. "Complacency," Harrison replied without hesitation. "They've enjoyed 3 millennia of peace and prosperity while we've been locked away. Their military technology has advanced incrementally, following predictable patterns. Their strategies are based on conventional thinking about space warfare and galactic politics." Sarah smiled, though there was no humor in the expression. "They still think like separate species competing for resources and territory. They've never learned to truly work together." The irony was profound. The galaxy had quarantined humanity because of their violent, unpredictable nature. But that same violence, when channeled properly, had become humanity's greatest strength. Unable to fight external enemies, humans had waged war against the fundamental limitations of physics, biology, and consciousness itself. "Captain," interrupted the voice of Admiral Elena Vasquez from Earth Command. "We're receiving final confirmation from the deep space reconnaissance teams. The monitoring stations in sectors 7 through 12 have been neutralized." Sarah nodded, pulling up tactical displays that showed the current state of the quarantine barrier. Over the past year, human stealth ships had been systematically disabling the automated stations that had kept them imprisoned. Each operation had been planned with the precision that came from 3,000 years of studying their captors' technology and tactics. "The Vorthak Empire has tripled their border patrols," reported Harrison, monitoring galactic communications. "The Celestial Federation is recalling their merchant fleets from the outer systems. They know something is happening, but they don't understand what." "How could they?" Sarah asked rhetorically. "They're thinking like the galaxy has always thought, in terms of conquest through force, territorial expansion, resource competition. They can't comprehend what we've become." The truth was that humanity no longer needed to conquer in the traditional sense. 3,000 years of isolation had taught them that true power came not from controlling territory, but from transcending limitations. While other species had focused on incremental improvements to existing technologies, humans had revolutionized the fundamental nature of existence itself. Lieutenant Commander Webb appeared on the observation deck, his expression excited but controlled. "Captain, we're receiving telemetry from the advanced scouts. They've successfully penetrated the Kethmori home system." Sarah raised an eyebrow. The Kethmori were the oldest spacefaring race in the galaxy, the species that had originally proposed humanity's quarantine. Their technology was ancient but sophisticated, their defenses considered impenetrable. "How long were our ships in their system before being detected?" she asked. "They weren't detected. Webb replied, his voice filled with quiet pride. Our scouts observed their homeworld for 3 full days, analyzed their defensive capabilities, and departed without triggering a single sensor. The implications were staggering. Humanity's stealth technology, developed through centuries of evading the monitoring stations, had advanced to the point where they could move through heavily defended space undetected. The galaxy's most ancient and advanced civilization had been completely unaware of the human presence in their most protected territory. "What's our assessment of their capabilities?" Sarah asked. Dr. Harrison activated a holographic display showing the data collected by the scouts. Their weapons technology is roughly equivalent to what we possessed 500 years ago. Their defensive systems follow predictable patterns. Most significantly, their forces are distributed across hundreds of different worlds, with minimal coordination between systems. Sarah studied the data, her enhanced mind processing tactical implications at superhuman speed. They're still thinking in terms of defending individual planets and systems. They haven't adapted to the possibility of facing an enemy that can strike anywhere simultaneously. "Should we be concerned about their alliance with the other major powers?" Webb asked. "What alliance?" Harrison replied with a slight smile. "Our intelligence indicates that the various galactic powers maintain separate military commands, compete for resources, and regularly engage in territorial disputes. They call it diplomacy, but it's really barely controlled chaos." Sarah turned back to the viewport, watching as the final human ships completed their preparations. Each vessel in the fleet represented technologies that the galaxy couldn't imagine. Faster-than-light drives that operated on principles the galactic powers had never discovered. Weapons systems that could manipulate spacetime itself. Most importantly, a level of coordination and unity that came from 3,000 years of shared purpose. "Begin Phase 2, she commanded. "All ships are authorized to proceed to their designated systems." Around the observation deck, holographic displays showed the deployment of humanity's forces. Unlike the random, chaotic expansion that the galaxy expected from humans, this was a precisely coordinated operation that would simultaneously target key systems across galactic space. "The Galactic Council is convening an emergency session," reported Harrison, monitoring their communications. "They're trying to organize a unified response." "Let them," Sarah replied calmly. "By the time they agree on a course of action, the operation will be complete." The beauty of humanity's plan was its simplicity. While the galaxy prepared for invasion and conquest, humans were implementing something far more sophisticated. They weren't interested in destroying other species or claiming their territory. Instead, they were going to demonstrate the futility of the galactic power structure itself. "Captain," interrupted Admiral Vasquez's voice from Earth Command, "we're receiving reports from advanced teams across the galaxy. All primary targets have been identified and marked for simultaneous operations." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of 3 millennia of human development and preparation. Every technological breakthrough, every scientific discovery, every moment of innovation during their isolation had led to this moment. Humanity was about to introduce itself to the galaxy in a way that would fundamentally change the nature of interstellar civilization. "All ships prepare for emergence," she announced. "Remember, we're not here to conquer, we're here to liberate." The distinction was crucial. While other species fought wars to claim territory and resources, humans were fighting to eliminate the need for such conflicts entirely. 3,000 years of forced cooperation had taught them that true strength came not from domination, but from elevation. As the Endeavor and hundreds of sister ships engaged their advanced drive systems, Sarah felt a moment of profound satisfaction. The galaxy had tried to cage humanity like dangerous animals. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous, a species that had learned to transcend the limitations that defined galactic civilization. The humans were emerging from their long slumber, and they were bringing gifts that the galaxy never knew it needed. Admiral Krost's flagship trembled as unknown forces tore through the hegemon fleet's most advanced defensive formations like they were made of paper. Around him, the bridge crew of the mighty dreadnought Dominator worked frantically at their stations, their mechanical augmentations sparking with overloaded data processing as they tried to comprehend what was happening. "Report," Krost barked, his cybernetic arm crushing the armrest of his command chair as another wave of impossible energy washed over their shields. "Sir, we're detecting multiple contacts throughout the system," reported his tactical officer, her organic eyes wide with disbelief while her cybernetic ones flickered with computational overload. "They're not showing up on any of our standard sensors. We only know they're there because they're doing things to our ships." "What things?" Cross demanded, though part of him already dreaded the answer. "The destroyer Annihilator has been completely immobilized. No damage, no casualties, but every system is offline. The cruiser Devastator is reporting that their weapons have been somehow improved. Their energy output has increased by 300%, but they can't control the targeting systems." Crost's mind raced. In 4 centuries of military service, he had never encountered anything like this. Enemies that attacked without being detected, that could disable ships without destroying them, that could improve enemy weapons while making them unusable. It defied every principle of space warfare he had ever learned. "Sir," called the communications officer, her voice filled with barely controlled panic. "We're receiving a transmission. It's coming from everywhere at once. Every ship in the fleet is receiving the same signal simultaneously." "Put it through," Crost ordered, though his enhanced survival instincts were screaming warnings that his conscious mind couldn't quite process. The main display activated, showing a human female in a uniform that seemed to be made of some kind of adaptive material that shifted and flowed like liquid metal. She appeared to be standing on the bridge of a starship, though the technology visible behind her was unlike anything in the galactic databases. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the human starship Endeavor," the figure said, her voice carrying clearly despite the massive distances involved. "I'm addressing Admiral Crost of the Hegemon Fleet, along with the commanders of 17 other major military formations currently positioned throughout this sector." Crost felt his organic components go cold, while his mechanical systems registered elevated stress readings. How could this human know his name? How could she be transmitting to multiple fleets across vast distances simultaneously? How did she even know where his forces were positioned? "Your ships have been temporarily disabled as a demonstration," Captain Chen continued, her tone conversational despite the impossibility of what she was describing. "No permanent damage has been done. Your crews are unharmed. This action was taken to prevent unnecessary casualties during our initial contact." "Impossible," muttered the tactical officer. "Our fleet is spread across 3 star systems. No single ship could coordinate an attack on this scale." Captain Chen seemed to hear the comment despite the fact that the transmission should have been one way. "You're correct that no single ship could accomplish this. That's why we didn't use a single ship. We used 11,437 vessels, coordinated through quantum entanglement networks that allow instantaneous communication across galactic distances." The bridge fell silent. 11,000 ships. The entire Hegemon fleet contained fewer than 800 vessels, and it was considered one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. "I know this is difficult to process," Captain Chen continued, her expression showing what appeared to be genuine sympathy. "Your species has spent 3,000 years believing that humans were primitive, violent creatures that needed to be contained for the galaxy's safety. The truth is more complex." Admiral Crost found his voice. "What do you want?" he demanded, his words transmitted through channels he didn't understand to a ship he couldn't detect. "To talk," Captain Chen replied simply. "Specifically, to explain why the current galactic order is ending and what will replace it." Around the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place. On the Vorthak homeworld, massive human vessels had appeared in orbit without triggering a single defensive system. The planet's 6 billion inhabitants watched in amazement as their supposedly impregnable planetary shields were simply bypassed, not destroyed or overwhelmed, but treated as if they didn't exist. Ambassador Zector stood in the Planetary Defense Center, his 6 eyes fixed on displays that showed impossible readings. Human ships filled the sky above major cities, but they weren't attacking. Instead, they were broadcasting messages in perfect Vorthak, explaining that their presence was temporary and peaceful. "How are they doing this?" he whispered to his aide, a smaller Vorthak whose natural armor was trembling with fear. "According to our scientists, they're using some form of dimensional manipulation," the aide replied, his voice barely audible. "They're not breaking through our shields, they're existing in a slightly different phase of space-time where our shields don't affect them." The implications were staggering. For millennia, Galactic warfare had been based on the principle that defensive shields could protect against offensive weapons. If humans had developed technology that could simply bypass those defenses, every military doctrine in the galaxy was obsolete. On the crystalline homeworld of the Celestial Federation, Ambassador Lyra watched as human figures appeared directly within the planetary council chambers. They hadn't used transportation technology that the Federation could detect. They had simply materialized as if the very concept of distance was irrelevant to them. "Greetings," said the lead human, a tall man whose clothing seemed to be made of condensed starlight. "I am Dr. James Harrison, representing the human species in matters of xenobiological cooperation. We've come to discuss the future of galactic civilization." "How did you get past our security?" Lyra demanded, her crystalline form pulsing with agitated colors. "We didn't," Harrison replied gently. "We simply exist at a quantum level that your security systems aren't designed to detect. It's not a matter of superior technology. It's a matter of different fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality." Throughout the galaxy, the pattern was the same. Human ships and representatives appeared where they shouldn't be able to exist, demonstrating capabilities that challenged every known law of physics and military strategy. But unlike the violent invasion that everyone expected, the humans seemed primarily interested in conversation. Back on Admiral Krost's flagship, Captain Chen was explaining humanity's development during their 3,000-year isolation. "You quarantined us because our species was violent and unpredictable," she said. "That assessment was correct, but isolation forced us to channel that violence in new directions." "What directions?" Krost asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know the answer. "We made war on the fundamental forces of the universe," Captain Chen replied. "We couldn't fight other species, so we fought gravity, time, distance, and the limitations of biological existence itself. We won." The displays around Captain Chen shifted, showing images of human development over the millennia. Cities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Humans whose consciousness had been expanded beyond the limitations of organic brains. Technologies that manipulated space and time as easily as other species manipulated matter and energy. "The galaxy quarantined us because we were too dangerous to interact with other civilizations," Captain Chen continued. "But the quarantine itself became our greatest teacher. It taught us that true power comes not from conquering others, but from transcending the limitations that make conquest necessary." Admiral Krost processed this information through his enhanced cognitive systems, trying to understand what the human was really saying. "You're claiming that isolation made you peaceful." Captain Chen smiled, and there was something in that expression that made Krost's survival instincts scream warnings. "Not peaceful, Admiral. Evolved. We're still violent, still competitive, still aggressive, but we've learned to direct those traits toward problems that actually matter." "Such as?" "The fact that galactic civilization is based on scarcity, conflict, and the assumption that different species must compete for limited resources. We're here to solve those problems." Around the galaxy, human representatives were making similar presentations to every major government, military force, and political organization. The message was consistent. The old way of doing things was ending, not through conquest but through transcendence. On the ancient Kithmori homeworld, High Chancellor Vexon listened as a human explained technologies that could eliminate scarcity, end the need for territorial conflicts, and allow species to focus on growth rather than competition. The human spoke of quantum manufacturing that could create any needed resource from base energy, of consciousness transfer technologies that made death optional, of space-time manipulation that made distance irrelevant. "Why are you telling us this?" Vexon asked. "If you possess such capabilities, you could simply impose your will on the galaxy." "Because imposition doesn't create lasting change," the human replied. "We learned that lesson during our isolation. True transformation requires understanding and cooperation." But there was something else in the human's tone, something that made Vexon's ancient instincts respond with primal fear. The humans were offering partnership, but the alternative was becoming increasingly clear. Species that refused to evolve, that insisted on maintaining the old patterns of conflict and competition, would become irrelevant. As reports flooded in from across the galaxy, a terrifying picture emerged. Humanity hadn't just survived their 3,000-year quarantine. They had used it to become something beyond conventional understanding. They weren't conquerors in the traditional sense. They were gardeners, preparing to cultivate a galaxy that had grown wild and chaotic in their absence. The galaxy had trembled in fear of human violence. Now it was beginning to understand that there were things far more terrifying than violence. There was transcendence, evolution, and the patient certainty of a species that had learned to make the impossible routine. The humans had awakened from their long slumber, and they were reshaping reality itself. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been ongoing for 6 standard days, and the assembled representatives were no closer to understanding what they faced than when it began. High Chancellor Vexon looked around the chamber at faces that showed expressions ranging from terror to bewilderment to desperate hope. "The reports are consistent across all sectors," announced Dr. Yelana, her tentacles moving frantically as she processed data from thousands of sources. "Human vessels have appeared in every major system in the galaxy. They've disabled our defensive networks, bypassed our most advanced technologies, and demonstrated capabilities that our greatest scientists insist are impossible." Ambassador Zector's massive frame shook with barely contained rage. "They've made us look like children. The Vorthak Empire's orbital defenses were neutralized by what appeared to be a single human walking through our shield generators. A single individual. Our scientists still can't explain how she did it." "The Celestial Federation's quantum locks were opened like simple mechanical doors," added Ambassador Lyra, her crystalline form pulsing with agitated colors. "Technologies that took us millennia to develop were circumvented as if they were toys." General Korzeth of the Military Alliance stood at his position, his armored form rigid with military bearing despite the defeat written in his posture. "I've reviewed combat reports from every engagement across the galaxy. In each case, human forces demonstrated tactical superiority that shouldn't be possible. They knew our positions before we did. They understood our strategies better than we did. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to anticipate our responses before we made them." High Chancellor Vexon activated the central display, showing a tactical overview of the galaxy. Red indicators marked human presence in thousands of systems simultaneously. "What troubles me most is not what they've done, but what they haven't done. They possess the capability to destroy every military force in the galaxy, yet they've caused minimal casualties. Why?" "Because destruction was never their goal," said a new voice. Every head in the chamber turned toward the source of the sound. Standing in the center of the circular assembly was a human female wearing clothing that seemed to shift between different configurations as they watched. She hadn't triggered any alarms, hadn't been detected by the chamber's sophisticated security systems. She was simply there, as if she had always been there. "I am Dr. Alina Rodriguez," the human said, her voice carrying clearly to every delegate despite the chamber's size. "I represent humanity in matters of galactic social evolution. I've come to answer your questions and explain what happens next." Ambassador Thren of the Trade Consortium clicked his mandibles nervously. "How did you get in here? This chamber is protected by 7 different security systems." "Your security systems are designed to detect threats," Dr. Rodriguez replied calmly. "I'm not a threat, I'm a teacher." General Korzeth's hand moved toward his sidearm, but Dr. Rodriguez continued speaking as if she hadn't noticed the gesture. "General, your weapon operates by accelerating metallic projectiles using magnetic fields. I should mention that the local magnetic environment in this chamber has been adjusted. Your weapon will not function properly. Neither will anyone else's." Korzeth drew his weapon and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. Around the chamber, other delegates checked their own defensive devices, finding them equally useless. "How?" whispered Ambassador Lyra. "Localized manipulation of electromagnetic fields," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "It's a basic application of what we call environmental control technology. We can adjust physical laws within limited areas to prevent violence while encouraging discussion." High Chancellor Vexon leaned forward in his chair, his ancient eyes studying the human with millennia of diplomatic experience. "What do you want from us?" "Nothing," Dr. Rodriguez replied, and the simplicity of that answer sent chills through the assembled delegates. "We don't need anything from you. We've moved beyond scarcity-based economics, territorial requirements, and resource competition. We're here to offer you the same freedom." "What kind of freedom?" asked Dr. Yelana, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. Dr. Rodriguez gestured, and the central display shifted to show images that defied comprehension. Cities that existed in multiple dimensions, powered by controlled manipulation of space-time itself. Manufacturing systems that created any needed material from pure energy. Transportation networks that allowed instantaneous travel across galactic distances. Freedom from want, Dr. Rodriguez said. Freedom from the scarcity that has driven galactic conflicts for millennia. Freedom from the assumption that different species must compete for limited resources. And if we refuse, General Korzeth asked bluntly. Dr. Rodriguez's expression remained calm, but something in her eyes made the general step backward involuntarily. Then you'll continue existing as you have for the past several thousand years, fighting over resources that are actually abundant, maintaining territorial boundaries that are ultimately meaningless, and preventing your species from achieving their full potential. But you'll leave us alone, Ambassador Zector demanded. Define alone, Dr. Rodriguez replied. We won't interfere with your internal affairs or force you to adopt our technologies, but we also won't allow you to interfere with the evolution of galactic civilization. The implications were staggering. The humans weren't offering conquest, they were offering irrelevance. Species that refused to evolve would be permitted to exist, but they would no longer matter in the larger scope of galactic affairs. You're talking about the end of galactic government as we know it, High Chancellor Vexon said quietly. Yes, Dr. Rodriguez confirmed. The current system is based on the assumption that different species must compete for influence and resources. That assumption is now obsolete. Ambassador Lyra's crystalline form pulsed with rapid calculations. You're proposing to replace politics with, what? Benevolent dictatorship. We're proposing to eliminate the need for politics entirely, Dr. Rodriguez replied. When resources are unlimited, when distance is irrelevant, when scarcity is eliminated, the foundation for political conflict disappears. But what about individual freedom? Demanded Ambassador Thren. What about the right of species to determine their own destinies? Dr. Rodriguez smiled, and there was genuine warmth in the expression. Every species will be free to pursue whatever destiny they choose. The difference is that their choices will no longer be limited by artificial scarcity or territorial boundaries. Show us, said Dr. Yelana suddenly. If these technologies are real, demonstrate them. Dr. Rodriguez nodded and gestured toward the chamber's main display. Computer, analyze the atmospheric composition of this chamber and optimize it for the health and comfort of all species present. The chamber's environmental systems, which had maintained standard galactic atmosphere for millennia, suddenly shifted. The air became cleaner, more energizing, perfectly balanced for every species in the room. Delegates who had been experiencing minor discomfort from breathing non-optimal atmosphere found themselves feeling more alert and healthy than they had in years. The chamber's quantum manufacturing system will now provide each delegate with a small gift, Dr. Rodriguez continued. Before anyone could react, objects began materializing on the table in front of each delegate. For Ambassador Zector, a perfect crystalline sculpture that captured the beauty of his homeworld's rings. For Ambassador Lyra, a harmonic resonance device that produced music perfectly tuned to crystalline perception. For each delegate, something perfectly suited to their species' aesthetics and needs. Impossible, breathed General Korzeth, examining a tactical analysis device that seemed to contain more computing power than his entire flagship. Routine, Dr. Rodriguez corrected. This is everyday technology for us. We stopped seeing it as impossible about 1,500 years ago. High Chancellor Vexon picked up his gift, an information storage device that contained what appeared to be the complete history of his species, including events that hadn't been recorded anywhere. How do you know about these things? Some of these historical records were lost millennia ago. We've been watching, Dr. Rodriguez said simply. 3,000 years of careful observation, studying every aspect of galactic civilization. We know your histories better than you do. We understand your cultures more completely than you understand them yourselves. We've had 3 millennia to prepare for this moment. The truth was settling over the delegates like a heavy blanket. Humanity hadn't just survived their quarantine. They had used it to study and understand their captors completely. Every transmission, every cultural exchange, every piece of information that had leaked through the quarantine barrier had been analyzed and absorbed. You're saying you've been preparing to manage us? Ambassador Thren asked, his voice barely a whisper. We've been preparing to free you, Dr. Rodriguez replied. From scarcity, from conflict, from the limitations that have defined galactic civilization since spaceflight began. The question is whether you're willing to be freed. And if we're not? Dr. Rodriguez's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Then you'll discover that your weapons don't work, your ships can't leave your systems, and your communication networks only function when we allow them to function. Not because we want to control you, but because we won't allow you to interfere with the species that do choose to evolve. The silence that followed was profound. Every delegate understood what they were really being offered: evolution or extinction. Not physical extinction, but irrelevance so complete that it amounted to the same thing. High Chancellor Vexon looked around the chamber at his fellow delegates, seeing the same realization in their faces that he felt in his own hearts. The galaxy had tried to cage humanity because they were too dangerous to roam free. Instead, they had created gardeners who were now ready to tend their garden. "What do you need from us?" he asked finally. Dr. Rodriguez smiled again, and this time there was something almost parental in the expression. "Just say yes." 6 months after the emergence, Captain Sarah Chen stood once again on the observation deck of the Endeavour, but the view had changed dramatically. Where once there had been empty space between star systems, now streams of light-connected worlds in a vast network of instantaneous transportation. The galaxy was becoming something new, something unprecedented in the history of galactic civilization. "Status report from all sectors," she requested, though the information was already flowing through her enhanced neural interface faster than spoken words could convey. "Sector Alpha 7 reports completion of their first quantum manufacturing hub," announced Lieutenant Commander Webb, his voice carrying satisfaction and amazement in equal measure. "The Kethmori colonies are now completely self-sufficient in all resource categories. Sector Gamma 12 shows successful integration of Vorthak warrior culture with human conflict resolution technologies," added Dr. Harrison, who was monitoring the social evolution aspects of the transformation. "They're using their aggressive instincts to compete in artistic and athletic endeavors rather than territorial conflicts." Sarah smiled, remembering her concerns 6 months ago about how the various species would adapt to the new reality. The transition had been smoother than anyone had dared to hope, though not without challenges. "What about the Crystalline Federation?" she asked. "Remarkable progress," Dr. Harrison replied, his excitement evident. "Their natural ability to process multiple frequencies of light has made them incredibly effective at managing the quantum communication networks. They've become our primary partners in expanding the instantaneous information grid." The transformation hadn't been forced. After Dr. Rodriguez's presentation to the Galactic Council, humanity had simply begun implementing their technologies in any system that requested them. The results spoke for themselves. Worlds that had struggled with resource shortages for millennia suddenly found themselves with unlimited abundance. Species that had been locked in territorial conflicts for centuries discovered that territory was no longer a meaningful concept. "Captain," interrupted Admiral Vasquez's voice from Earth Command, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Outer Rim territories. It appears some of the independent systems are finally ready to discuss participation." Sarah nodded. The transformation hadn't been universal or immediate. Several major powers and numerous independent systems had initially refused human assistance, preferring to maintain their traditional ways of existence. Humanity had respected those choices, but the contrast between transformed and untransformed systems was becoming increasingly apparent. "Put them through," Sarah said. The main display activated, showing a collection of representatives from 12 different star systems in the galaxy's outer regions. They looked haggard, desperate, and deeply frustrated. "I am Governor Malvin of the Rigel Consortium," announced their apparent leader, a blue-skinned humanoid whose species Sarah recognized as Caleri. "We've been monitoring the changes in the core systems. We want to discuss terms." "There are no terms," Sarah replied gently. "We offer the same assistance to everyone. No obligations, no conditions, no political requirements. Just technological and social support for species that want to evolve beyond scarcity-based existence." "But why?" demanded another representative, a reptilian creature whose scales were dull with stress. "What do you gain from helping us?" Dr. Harrison materialized on the bridge through the ship's transport system. "Governor, I'm Dr. James Harrison. I study the social evolution of galactic civilization. May I answer your question?" The governor nodded, though his expression remained suspicious. "We gain a galaxy where our children and grandchildren can explore, learn, and grow without constantly dealing with conflicts over resources that don't need to be scarce," Harrison explained. "We gain neighbors who are focused on creation rather than competition, partners who can contribute to the expansion of consciousness and capability rather than the perpetuation of ancient grudges." "You're talking about the end of individual species sovereignty," Governor Malvin said. "We're talking about the beginning of individual consciousness sovereignty," Harrison replied. "When scarcity is eliminated, when distance becomes irrelevant, when death becomes optional, the focus shifts from protecting group resources to expanding individual potential." Sarah watched the faces on the display as they processed this concept. The transformation of galactic civilization had revealed something profound about the nature of conflict and cooperation. Most of the violence and competition that had defined interstellar relations for millennia had been driven by artificial scarcity and the assumption that one species' gain required another species' loss. "What happened to the Vorthak military?" asked a representative from the Tau Ceti system. "Their empire was built on conquest and territorial expansion." "They discovered that there are more interesting things to conquer than territory," Sarah replied. "Some of them are currently engaged in a project to explore alternate dimensions. Others are using their strategic thinking to solve complex mathematical problems that could unlock new levels of consciousness manipulation. They're still warriors, but they're fighting against the limitations of existence itself rather than against other people." The transformation of the Vorthak Empire had been one of the most dramatic examples of how human technologies could redirect rather than suppress existing cultural traits. The same aggressive instincts that had once driven territorial expansion were now focused on challenges that actually mattered: the fundamental mysteries of reality, consciousness, and the universe itself. "Governor," Dr. Harrison continued, "your consortium has been struggling with resource shortages on 7 different worlds. Your population growth has been limited by agricultural capacity. Your people have been fighting border skirmishes with 3 neighboring systems over mining rights to asteroid fields. All of those problems can be solved in approximately 6 days if you allow us to implement basic quantum manufacturing and space-time manipulation technologies in your systems." "And in exchange?" "Nothing," Sarah said firmly. "We don't need anything from you. We're not interested in controlling your governments or your cultures. We're interested in eliminating the scarcity that forces you to fight over resources that can be infinite." The representatives exchanged glances, and Sarah could see the internal struggle on their faces. Accepting human assistance meant admitting that their traditional way of life was obsolete, but refusing it meant watching their people struggle with problems that could be easily solved. "There's something else you should know," Dr. Harrison added gently. "The species that have already accepted our assistance are beginning to explore capabilities that your current technologies can't match. The Kethmori are experimenting with consciousness transfer technologies that effectively make death optional. The Celestial Federation is developing art forms that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The gap between transformed and untransformed systems is widening rapidly." The implication was clear. Species that continued to refuse human assistance wouldn't just be left behind. They would become incomprehensible to their transformed neighbors. The galaxy was evolving, and the choice was to evolve with it or become extinct not through violence but through irrelevance. "We need guarantees," Governor Malvin said finally. "Assurance that you won't use these technologies to control us." Sarah smiled, understanding the fear behind the request. "Governor, in approximately 15 minutes, every ship in your defense fleet is going to receive complete technical specifications for your most advanced weapon systems, along with detailed instructions for improving their effectiveness by roughly 3,000%. This information is being provided freely, without conditions, as a demonstration of our intentions." The representatives looked stunned. "You're giving us military technology." "We're giving you the ability to defend yourselves against any threat except us," Sarah replied honestly. "But since we're not interested in threatening you, that should be sufficient." Dr. Harrison activated additional displays showing the current state of galactic civilization. Governor, look at these statistics. Crime rates in transformed systems have dropped by 97%, not because of increased law enforcement, but because scarcity-driven crime has become impossible. Territorial conflicts have been eliminated entirely. Scientific advancement has accelerated by several orders of magnitude as researchers from different species collaborate without worrying about competitive advantages. What about individual freedom? Asked another representative. What about the right to fail, to make mistakes, to choose our own destinies? Enhanced, Sarah replied immediately. When survival is guaranteed, when resources are unlimited, when death becomes optional, every choice becomes truly free. You can pursue any dream, explore any possibility, take any risk, because failure no longer means devastation. The representatives fell silent, and Sarah could see them wrestling with concepts that challenged everything they had believed about the nature of existence and civilization. There's one final thing you should understand, Dr. Harrison said softly. This transformation isn't optional for the galaxy as a whole. Consciousness is evolving, technology is advancing, and the fundamental nature of reality is being rewritten. The only choice is whether your species participates in that evolution or becomes a relic of the old ways. Governor Malvin looked around at his fellow representatives, seeing the same acceptance in their faces that was growing in his own expression. What do we need to do? Just say yes, Sarah replied, echoing Dr. Rodriguez's words from 6 months earlier. As the representatives agreed to accept human assistance, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. 3,000 years of isolation had taught humanity patience, wisdom, and the importance of choosing evolution over extinction. The galaxy had tried to cage them as dangerous animals. Instead, they had become gardeners, cultivating a new form of civilization that transcended the limitations that had defined intelligent life since consciousness first emerged among the stars. The galaxy no longer trembled in fear. It was growing, evolving, and becoming something magnificent under humanity's patient guidance. The long slumber was over, and the real work of building the future had begun.